Technical difficulty.
There we go.
Yeah, hi everyone, sorry about that. So we are CLN6, Elliot, Dave, Tanya and myself, and we're going to take you on a journey. So first of all, we thought we'd start with some Macadaka and rock and roll to get you all going with some impact. Like anything, a journey starts with a trigger, and so basically buckle up. We're going to take you through 8-10 weeks of work we did to get all this going. So the first part of this was the trigger that we looked at was the Commonwealth procurement rules. So for those of you who haven't been involved, most of you have, Commonwealth procurement rules are a set of legislation that was put in November 2016. It applies to government procurement of projects over $4 million. It encompasses basically any industry. There are a number of requirements. It's about demonstrating ethical compliance, so slave labour, child labour.
Hang on, not demonstrating that.
Not demonstrating it, but that you don't use those things. Sustainability is another one. It's also about demonstrating compliance. And whenever people choose procurement, they actually have to consider the benefit to the Australian economy. So that was our problem statement that we started with, so we double diamond this. So we want to look at the landscape that the procurement rule lives in. So we went to our favourite tool, which is Pestle, and we actually looked at the political environment. And we actually saw that we're actually in an environment at the moment where we've got very, very marginal government support. So both nationally and at state. So we're finding that voters are moving away from major parties and not voting like their parents did. They're actually connecting with minor parties that are actually meeting their needs and matching their requirements. So there's a big move there from just voting Labor and Liberal. We found that there's a significant spend when we looked at the economics and the public health and the building and construction industry. We looked at a lot of the social issues that are currently trending, and there's a lot around sustainability, around job loss, around public waste of money, and also about offshoring, both jobs going overseas and offshoring of manufacturing. And the other thing we looked at as part of our Pestle was technology advances. Now, technology has moved a hell of a lot in the last 10 years. So there's things like mobile phones, there's cloud computing, there's big data. There's a thing called user experience, which is changing the way we interact with computers. And there's also things like, as I pointed out earlier, virtual reality and augmented reality. So when we took all of those into account, we actually came up with a result that we're actually going to look at procurement within the building and construction industry, because that's got about a $60 to $75 billion to spend. So how do we drill down into within that industry to work out what we're going to do next? Now, we actually borrowed, it was mentioned before, from Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. We've actually turned it on its head a little bit. So he says you start from the why and work out. We've actually started with the what. So we looked at the what, we went through the procurement industry, and we looked at all the personas. So we did a persona check. We broke our personas up into 3 categories. We've got builders, suppliers and consumers, and then within those there were particular personas, and I won't go into them all. We actually went out and conducted interviews to understand how all these personas interact, and then we went through a process of evaluating and scoring them. And what we did is we scored them on the influence they have in the market and their likelihood to change, because what we want to try and find is who are our key personas to target. And when we actually mapped all of that on a perceptual map, we actually found that the government customer by far is the most important person to target, followed closely by your quality surveyors and your builders. Insurers do actually have a lot of influence, but they tend to get involved further on in the process, so we didn't consider them as being good early adopters. Now we'll step down into the next part of our thing, which is the how. So what actually happens within the industry? So we went and actually drew a tendering process map of the whole tendering process, and there'll be a test on this later. But really what we found is, as your tendering process steps from stakeholder to stakeholder, you get this process of risk transfer. So as the procurement people pass it to the project manager, they're transferring the risk. And the project manager transfers the risk to a designer, an architect, and he transfers the risk to a builder. And so it goes on down the chain. So ultimately, all of your product decisions are made by the people at the end here who are margin driven. All they want to do is make a profit. So all your quality decisions are made down the bottom end here. We also found, when we actually mapped the process, that there's actually quite a disparity in who is responsible for doing the checking. So you've got mostly your checks can occasionally done by your builders and your subcontractors because they employ the quality surveyors. So there's a big disparity between who should be checking and who's getting the benefit of the checking. And finally, the other issue we found is that actually it's a stepped process. So it's not a process which is embedded. It's actually, they do a bit of work and then they check. And sometimes you can go all the way to construction, build, handover, before a quality check is done and finds a problem. So that's how we define the how. Now we get to the gold. So we actually go down to the why. And what we've done is we've set our government customer in the centre of our circle. And the reason is, and I'm borrowing from a couple of people here, so Simon Sinek says when he's in his golden circle, when an organisation can clearly articulate why they do something, they can motivate change. And then if you take your means end chain value theory, we blend that together, that says when people are highly motivated and connected to something which meets their personal values, they're motivated to change. So therefore, by understanding what is the motivations of our government customer, they're the values that we need to underpin the CPR moving forward. And when we look at that, the motivations for the government customer are really a better future, better quality, and better for the industry. It really is. They're protecting their brand, because for them, brand protection means re-election.
Thanks, Steve. So, up there in the top left corner is the double diamond theory that we use to go through to ideate along our customer-focused journey from the first problem we were hit with, which was Commonwealth procurement rules, through to digging further through the environment. Steve's just given us a really big summary of it, and guys, it is big and it is problems everywhere. Most of you guys would know that. So one of the analysis there was a SWOT analysis that we used. I'm not going to go too much in depth to these because Peter doesn't have his reading glasses on and Kevin wants me to be concise. So I'm just going to skip over these. But here's our research from our strength, opportunities, weakness and threats, all available in the report afterwards if anybody does want to spend more time on it. The external influences there being green for helpful and red for harmful against the opportunities and threats. Then we turned it around to the toes and we took that quite in depth as well, looking at which strength and opportunity went together, weaknesses and threats went together as well. So we came up with a long list of problem statements, which looks like a hell of a lot for one problem there that started. So I'll just quickly go through them. How might we leverage technology improvements in the procurements process? How might we embed auditing and compliance checkpoints as a proactive process in procurement? How might we improve efficiency of the procurement? How might we create better profit margins with the CPR? How might we shift culture and drive change towards quality and sustainability? How might we test pain points and benefits? How might we increase the awareness of the CPR to the industry and the general public? How might we enforce the CPR as a requirement to win government tenders? How might we communicate the benefits to the industry? How might we support the CPR with the appropriate legislation? How might we understand the total list of ownership? How might we make everyone accountable for quality and compliance? How might we move from risk transfer model to risk sharing model? All really important questions and all really good observations that we had come up to at this point. There's a lot there though. So we then weighed them up as a prioritisation. So each of those problem statements ticks X amount of scores of the strengths and weaknesses and touches on those. So rather than tackle them all, we then concentrate on the top 8, which are the top scores to look further into. So double diamond, just letting everyone know we've hit that halfway mark. Journey's halfway over, guys. We're halfway, okay? So we use some infinity clustering as well, tackling on people, process and problems, once again against our how might we statements that will be quite hard to read, Peter, I apologise. Another method and tool that we use there, don't want to go over it, just want to kind of show it as another tool that we use to help us identify. So at the end of our develop stage there, in order to successfully develop implement CPR and transition Australia's building industry from cost focus to a quality focus, the government will need to appoint a three-pronged strategy. The three focus areas will include administration, investigate the adoption of a technology tools to support consistent, unbiased and mature administration. Regulation, need to facilitate stronger oversight and regulation. Communication, identify messaging artefacts to build awareness, create urgency and demonstrate outcomes to the people impacted by the CPR. Pass you over to Tanya.
Thanks, Dave. As Dave did mention, after looking at the situational analysis and doing some ideation, we did land on this three-prong plan for marketing. The first one is communication. Now, all of these do address the key problem statements that we identified. Within regards to the communication strategy, we do have a key objective, which is to create and build awareness of the Australian Consumer Procurement Law by emphasising that compliance equates to a high level of efficiency and quality within the Australian infrastructure and social economy. Bit of a mouthful. I suppose, land on our objective, we had to meet some key high order motives from our key customers, our key audience rather, or our key stakeholders, which we did say was the building and construction industry, as well as the general public. By doing, again, a wide laddering model, we landed on trust as the inner circle. Trust is the high order motive, which we will support our problem statements and what will be the focus of our communication strategy. A consumer-facing message or catch cry was devised to communicate trust to our key stakeholders and delivered in a way to invoke an emotional reaction from these key stakeholders. The strongest message that we landed on after a bit of brainstorming and investigation was, Australia, is this acceptable? It also shows, by landing on this particular message, it shows that the government is being transparent and acknowledging that there are challenges and issues within this area and taking some ownership. We thought that the language and the imagery would resonate and invoke an emotional reaction from the key stakeholders. We then thought, well, how can we deliver this within regards to a media strategy? We've got a phase one of our media strategy. It'll be tiered towards outdoor media, radio, as well as digital mediums. And this is to capture our key consumers as they are commuting to work or on site, but generally creating that awareness, for the general public to capture, I suppose, that emotion and to capture interest there. A couple of the other things that we were talking to was some digital TV, as well as recommending some key sponsors and partnerships with either spokespeople or industry people in order to support that credibility around this message. There will be a phase two. A phase two of the media strategy will be undertaken after about a year of this first phase. And we hope that by that stage we'll have enough data and or insights in order to work out what worked exactly, and it will also help our core customer, the government, to be able to reinvest in areas that worked better in this strategy. A couple of in situ advertising here with our key message. We've got the billboards, the outdoor billboards along the roads. We have some tram advertising. Apologies if it's a little too small for the back of the room. We've also got some bus shelters and tram stops there to really create that interest and awareness throughout the, as I said, to the key stakeholders. Elliot will take you through solution 2.
So obviously, as Tanya sort of alluded to at the start, we've got a triangle of the solution we're putting forward, and part of it is communication and awareness, which you've just seen Tanya present. The next part, administration, and the third part, regulation, which I'll also speak to. So administration, what that means to us is actually leveraging technology and getting a digital register in place to actually help administer this change and drive it through. So what's this going to be? Well, it's going to be a central store of products and services demonstrating their compliance level. The government will be able to set the rules that are applied to the compliant, or set the rules of compliance that will be applied in this register, and they will ensure that all products that are represented in that register meet that level of compliance, removing the choice for products that don't meet those compliance and sustainability requirements. The register will enable searching and enable reporting, which can be utilised by all stakeholders in the environment. Obviously, it can be used by the consumer and the government to audit and check compliance, and it can also be used by the builder or producer to demonstrate compliance. And then tying back into what Stephen said earlier, we'll leverage cloud technology to integrate this solution with the regulators so that we can ensure that the data being presented in it meets the levels of integrity that we haven't seen previously. In our investigations, we ask most people how they check someone's compliant. They do a Google search. So how are we addressing the issue? Tying back to Dave's problem statements, this manages to check at least five of the 8. The ones I'll tap into a bit further, obviously shifting that culture to quality and sustainability. We're removing cost from the discussion by having this register. You can only pick things that meet the compliance and sustainability requirements. Also, the government can further enforce it by saying if you're going to submit a tender, have a reference from the registry, a report run against the registry, otherwise we're not going to accept it. There are ways that they can really drive that change. And importantly, when we look at phase 2 of the communication strategy, the government can run reports to show the progress that's been made and actually demonstrate quantifiable benefits to say this is the difference that the CPR is making. So if we look at how it would work in the real world, I'll just have a really quick example. For those of you familiar with the Perth Children's Hospital example, asbestos-laden ceiling tiles were ordered, they were delivered, they were installed, they were inspected, and they weren't detected. How they actually got detected was an external incident happened, and when someone was tending to that incident, they came across them. If we look at having the register in place, you would imagine that you've got all these 5 potential checkpoints, which we've identified would be areas where you could have a check of the register. And we would suspect that at point 2 here, a supplier with asbestos-laden product wouldn't be able to be selected at the order stage, solving the problem that we saw with Perth Children's Hospital. So the build and operating budget for this for the next 3 years, we're anticipating roughly $7 million. Our first year build would be about 1.8. There are products available in the market, but none that actually meet all of the core requirements. So there's definitely going to be a build component that would need to go in there, a lightweight team to support and do some further enhancement over the next 3 years. Implementation, we anticipate can be done within 12 months, so it would be there in time for CPR in 2018. And finally, the final part of our solution triad is the regulatory body that would act as our police officer to help enforce CPR. This wouldn't be a permanent solution. Basically, I like to think of them a bit like a Met Cop. They would be in there to actually make non-conformance to CPR more difficult and more risky than conformance. The end game will be to shift to a model of self-regulation where groups like insurers and financiers won't insure buildings or won't finance builders if they don't have their registry certification in there. However, until we make that step change, we will need something like this to help shift the culture within the building industry. So it ticks very similar boxes to what the last solution did, but what it does add to the register is that it actually supports the legislation and gives the government a stick in which they can go out and actually catch non-conformers, catch 1 or 2 of them and enforce some stiff penalties, and you'll start to drive that change throughout the building industry. We recommend it be intervened as a random check in all the areas where the registry solution is available, and we'd enforce the 3 R's. We'd be making sure that reporting reflects reality at each of those areas. As mentioned, it'd be a lean team. We're suggesting 6 people that would act as site visitors, much like your health safety checkers. They'd go out, they'd check and make sure those 3 R's are being fulfilled. And then once that step change is made, this team could be likely disbanded and hopefully we'll move to our self-regulation model. So bringing it all back together, you'll have the communication part of the solution, which will build the advocacy, but also later down the track, you can use that to help report your performance and report the effectiveness of CPR. And you have your administration and regulation arm, which help to do the enforcement and also help to enable people to use CPR. All over, we'd like to start the awareness campaign in 3 months to make sure we get messaging out there as soon as possible, and stand up the administration and regulation procedures in 12 months to make sure that by the time CPR is in place, all the facilities are there to steward it through. And one of the things with 2019 being a very important year for the government, we'd like to get these things up and running so they can have some tangible reporting available when they go to the polls in that year. And $13 million is the total cost when you add them all together. So just looking to the future a bit, this registry solution will obviously be the first step in technology, but what we'd like to allude to just quickly is where some other companies are going with technology, and once this register is in place, this video will help to show you what's possible with a solution like HoloLens when you, I'm not sure if the video is going to work for us, when you, is that on there? Once you've got your base technology in place. That doesn't look like it's going to work, which is a bit of a bummer.
It's on there. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter?
I can virtually see it.
Yeah, you can see it.
It's good. I'm channeling my last one.
Wrap up there, or is there anything else you want to add?
I can play it.
I don't know what's happened to that. It looks like it's embedded now. It worked in all our previous ones, but look, we'll wrap it up at that point because it's not going to work for us today.
You answer some questions, I'll find it.
Sorry, are there any questions in the meantime?
Well done.
Apart from the video.
I like CPR. CPR's good. Sorry, is it
Yeah,
Hashtags we need CPR.
I'm really pleased with the rebranding, but the motto, is this acceptable? Australia, is this acceptable? Your budgeting is presumably supported with the research and numbers, so that's validates it if you like. Your channels to market are great. I mean, you got into a lot of detail there, and then you squeezed them down, picked off the top, the high value ones, and then deliver those. You've done your profiling of your markets, so that's also great. Your transparency and ownership, and the concept of delegating responsibility or what was the term you used?
Risk transfer culture.
That's it, and that's the culture we live in. That's the first world luxury. We'll pass that on, and that's really what we need to stop. We need to stop that transfer of responsibility and share that responsibility across the product life cycle, which is actually a core feature of the product stewardship. So you've really hit on something, and there's legislation supporting the product stewardship. So that's another avenue to support that approach. I guess you didn't touch on that because it's a different piece of legislation, but it's the government's got a review of that legislation I think later this year. But it's a good mechanism as well. Okay, great. Yeah, I'll let these guys have a go. Yep.
I love the risk transfer analysis that you had done, and I guess the only question for me, and I think this might be a little lofty, I don't know how to do this, but can you democratize that risk or the identification of the risk to everybody? So as you talk about having folks that can, hiring a small team that can actually go in there and kind of check and balances, make sure that everyone's kind of meeting with the compliance. Can you get all 24 million Australians to actually be those people to do? I don't know how to do that, but
it's interesting.
You'd have the big issue straight away of getting on construction site, particularly when unions involved. You wouldn't be able to get them anywhere near it. So that would be your first big stumbling point from a residential point of view, working in residential buildings as well. Homeowners aren't actually supposed to be on that site without supervisors. It's fantastic because they are the people that affect, and it's their taxpayers' dollars and it's their votes and it's an election. So that's exactly the right stakeholder. But they're not allowed to have the involvement to actually change it.
So one of the ways you can actually share that risk is actually by embedding the risk into the process. So there is, in effect, there's no risk. I can't transfer the risk. I'm sharing the risk. So the audit checks are done, and they're part of the process. So as Elliot said, when I select a product, I'm only selecting compliant products. the government, the building surveyor can go into the system and check. One of the other things we did talk about is actually having a dashboard up on a website of all the government projects that are running, where you're actually demonstrating your compliance. So it's there for the general public, it's there for the auditors. People can go in and see what level of compliance the projects are as they're in flight, as they're running. So by sharing that risk, and Tanya alluded to it, we went for trust and transparency. So the whole essence behind this is it's acceptable. It's really the government saying, we're actually calling out that we don't think this is acceptable. We're being transparent. Transparency builds trust. So, and the more transparency you have, the more trust you have. So by making everything open, and as I said, embedding the quality controls in the process, you actually do share that risk.
Might not still keep them in power or win them seats, but it's going to resolve part of the issue where they don't have...
But as part of the analysis, I mean, that's the thing we said, people shifting to marginal parties because they can see impact, right? If they've got a tool where they can help demonstrate the impact, I mean, at the end of it, it was the Liberals with a combination that pushed the CPR through, combination of smaller parties that pushed the CPR through. They can use that to say, hey, this is what we've been able to do with it. And that'll be a powerful message if, considering the economy and everything at the moment.
Well, one of the biggest problems is, and depending on the type of construction project you do, you've actually got, your finance guys making the call on what products you buy. So, if your procurement or your finance guys, they're going to want to save a buck. So you've got to take that mechanism out. So you can't force people to change. You've just got to sort of embed that within the process.
Yeah, that's really interesting on that. And I like the idea you came up with of creating a dashboard, because we know with things like when the Bureau of Meteorology first came on board that anyone could access it, you end up with people suffering a condition of being addicted to constantly checking the weather. And you might
Was that a real thing?
Yes, apparently so. Yeah. There's a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands, and particularly an older cohort of people who tend to be the key people who give feedback on social media and on print media sites and the like. So I reckon these are the people you could tap into. With your previous groups, go for that. The golden oldies, they could be in there monitoring.
PR tool.
These are government buildings, and this one's sitting at 93.5 to 94. This one's up to, and it's almost. It could be a real talking point.
So to talk through the and here I will find the video, but to talk through, so the video is actually about the HoloLens, which you actually haven't seen. It's like virtual reality, but you can actually augmented reality. But you could actually be walking through a building site, and the idea is you could look at those windows and actually then say, yeah, I know that they're compliant, I know that they were manufactured in this locality. But you can do it from the design, so before the building's ever built, based on the design, right through to walking through a live building, because it is augmented reality and that does overlay.
And I think this is where you can get great PR. Because otherwise what you have, you've got quite a complex story to sell to government and to key stakeholders, but using the technology that this technology enables with
socialising.
To make this very transparent and most interesting. And then it gets right back to your whole thing about impact for government.
The problem is Apple won't play the video.
That's okay. So that's where I have issues with that. The Chrome's the go. Chrome next to it.
If anyone's interested, I'll put it on afterwards.
Look, what you did, you built a really strong story from the outset in terms of how you went through asking those questions of what, how, and why, and the way you built that up demonstrated there's an enormous amount of work that's gone into this. And what you basically said is this is incredibly complex, and then what we're going to do is we've got to make some choices about of those which you pick. And then even picking 8 shows that it's still then got a lot of aspects to it. So you're not trying to paint this as something that's a relatively simple set of things. So I think, and I know that's where you guys have come from, because you guys have gone very deep in terms of a lot of primary research and investigating things in that sense. So I think that showed that, but then to be able to then build that into a strategy that's 3-pronged around your comms, your admin, and your regulation, and what you're really doing here, because we sat through quite a few of the MBA ones, and they tended to target product-wise and selling product-wise. Of course, we're selling the registry as a solution. So you're talking about what the registry is as a one-stop shop store where the only things you can buy are those things that are actually online available. So I think even in selling that to government and pitching that creates a matter of, like a digestible story. And I think we all loved the way you showcased the example of what went wrong in terms of process and where things are being detected currently compared to how they could be done in the registry. So you've gone from a lot of complexity and then built a strategy and then just showcased how it can all go so wrong and how this registry can just enable that to be seamless. So I think that's excellent. Well done.